Welcome to the Sensory Bus podcast. On this podcast we are going to break down sensory processing disorder, explaining it in its smaller chunks. A bit about me. My name is Michael Martin, and 6 years ago I had never heard of sensory processing disorder. Then everything changed. My son was diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder, along with significant sensory processing issues. To be honest, we had been expecting the ASD diagnosis, but we still left the hospital in a daze. Over the next week we read and reread the diagnosis letter, and although it mentioned sensory issues, it didn't explain what they were. It was then that I hit the internet. I read everything I could, from websites, academic papers and videos, everything, and I kept notes. So this podcast is where I put all my notes together and break down what is sensory processing disorder.
Sensory processing disorder has three major patterns: sensory modulation disorder, sensory-based motor disorder, and sensory discrimination disorder. On this episode, we will start by explaining sensory modulation disorder. Sensory modulation disorder is broken down into three sub-patterns: sensory over-responsive, sensory under-responsive, and sensory craving.
Those with sensory over-responsivity are more sensitive to sensory stimulation than most people. They feel sensations more intensely and can feel sensory stimulation most people would not detect. This can elevate the body's fight or flight response, as they feel constantly under attack with sensory information. Some of the things to look out for can be an over-response to touch, loud noise, strong smells, and internal feelings like hunger or temperature. This list can go on. Think about your senses and times it by 10. Those with a sensory over-responsivity will often withdraw or attempt to minimize the sensations by covering their ears or spending time in an environment they can control more easily. Those with sensory under-responsivity are less sensitive to sensory stimulation than most people. They are often quiet and usually don't respond to sensory environment with the usual intensity. Due to this, they may appear withdrawn and difficult to engage. Their under-responsivity to sensory information can lead to poor body awareness and movement. Some of the things to look out for can be more withdrawn or self-absorbed, difficult to engage. They may not feel pain or the ability to judge temperatures, like food or drink. Those with sensory craving will seek out sensory stimulation, having a massive appetite for sensory input. Sensory craving is often linked to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or attention deficit disorder, ADD, due to the fact that they are constantly moving, jumping, crashing, and bumping into things. A main factor with sensory craving is that sensory input does not regulate the person, and they can become worse the more stimulation that they get.
In this episode, we're going to talk about sensory-based motor disorder. Sensory-based motor disorder is a difficulty with balance, motor coordination, and performing skilled motor tasks. It is broken down into postural disorder and dyspraxia. The person with postural disorder shows issues stabilizing their body during movement or at rest to reach the demands of the environment or of a motor task. Those with dyspraxia have issues processing sensory information, resulting in problems planning and carrying out new motor actions. They may have problems forming ideas and goals. They can be clumsy and accident prone. They can also have problems with ball games and other sports. They can hide their motor planning issues with verbalizations and fantasy play.
We are going to talk about sensory discrimination disorder. Sensory discrimination disorder describes how sensory stimulations are perceived and how they act and how the body understands them. This can result in a poor ability to interpret the specific qualities of stimuli or detecting similarities or differences among stimuli. For example, seeing a D instead of a B or hearing mat instead of sat. A person with sensory discrimination disorder can have issues with both gross and fine motor skills. They can take extra time to process sensory stimuli. Sensory discrimination disorder is broken down into auditory, visual, somatosensory, vestibular, proprioceptive, gustatory, olfactory and interoception. Let's start with auditory, your hearing sense. Problems relating to sound and language. You could have problems understanding long sentences and or difficulties following steps. Or they could have problems filtering out background noise. There can also be problems reciting back word for word, or they could whisper sentences while writing them. This is a small amount of issues that can affect a person with auditory issues. Next, we move on to the visual system. This sense is broken down into colour, brightness, depth perception. Some of the issues that can be present are an oversensitivity to bright or flashing lights, issues understanding where obstacles are in space, issues identifying letters or seeing number patterns, issues reading, skipping words or lines, or rereading the same line, or issues writing within lines and poor handwriting skills. Let's move on to somatosensory, or your touch sense. The areas that are affected by this are your skin, hair follicles, tongue, and throat. This can be affected by pressure, vibration, tickle, itch, touch, pain, or temperature. Some of the issues that arise could be things like disliking the feeling of certain fabrics, issues wearing shoes, issues with food textures including avoidance of mixed textures, dislikes hugs and kisses, avoids brushing teeth, and has problems getting their hair cut. Next, we move on to gustatory, your taste sense. You could have issues with being a picky eater, only eating foods of a certain temperature, enjoy extremely bland or extremely spicy foods, can lick or chew inedible objects, or you could have frequent drooling. The gustatory system is also linked to odour, texture and temperature. Olfactory, or your smell sense. People with this often have an aversion to perfumes or flowers, strong reactions to smells that others may not notice, craving strong or favourite smells. They do not like the strong smells, and they can decide if they like a person or not due to their smell. Next is vestibular, or your balance. The vestibular system includes the part of the inner ear and brain that helps control balance, eye movement and spatial orientation. It helps keep you stable and upright. People with vestibular issues may not know where their body is in space. This can make them feel off balance or out of control. Next is proprioception, or your body position. We all have receptors in our muscles that tell us where our body parts are. For example, if you raise your hand, you know that your arm is above your head. You don't have to think about it or look in a mirror. But those with proprioception issues may think that their arm is over their head, but it is actually straight out in front of them. And lastly, we have interoception. As with proprioception, there are receptors in your organs, including your skin. These help to regulate your vital functions, like body temperature, hunger, thirst, digestion, and heart rate. Interoception helps you understand and feel what's going on in your body. For people with interoception issues, the brain may have trouble making sense of that information. They may have issues letting you know if they feel pain or when they need to go to the toilet.